Alright, in this video I'll be drawing the human nose. In the last video with the eyes we talked about the structural line, the horizontal line that the eyes fall on. Well, there are two eyes, and right in the middle of that line you have a vertical line that leads down to the nose and eventually to the mouth. And since we're focusing on the nose today, we'll just focus on that part. Well, as I showed you in the last video, you basically have an eye length in between the face, and then of course you have the actual eye length, and then the nose comes down and there's a horizontal line. Now the nose usually falls somewhere between an eye length or maybe a little longer than the eye length. It really all depends on the picture you're looking at or how wide you want the nose. So it's really about how you want to draw the face. Okay, so let's just say this is the shape of the eye here, the shape of the eye here, shape of the eye here, shape of the eye here, and this is the nose. So here's my line, and this is the width that I want. Now of course, when you're actually drawing the nose, there are only 4 lines that you draw. Everything else is valued. So I'm going to start with the outside of the nostril, which will be kind of a line here. Could be soft, could be harder depending on the shadow, but this is the outside of the nostril here. We have the outside of the nostril here, and it perfectly gives you the width of the nose. And then of course you have the inside of the nostril, which is here, which is mainly the top part, and here. And you'll notice how those nostrils kind of start and line up on that horizontal line we started with. Now how much of the inside of the nostril and the angle of the nose is really determined based on how you want to draw the nose, if you're just making it up, or the picture that you're drawing from, if you're drawing from a nose, from the photograph or from life. So you definitely want to make sure you get the right angles based on what you're looking at, if you're looking at a reference. Now everything from here is all value. So once I have this area kind of knotted in, I want to go ahead and get rid of my structural lines. And then there are areas that I definitely want to highlight. I do know that there's like a light area that's going to kind of fall in here, so very lightly I'm just kind of pointing out where my highlight's going to be. That way I know where that is. And then from here, I'm just going to start by creating a base tone. We talked about base tones before, and this basically I'm taking my pencil and I'm shading a light gray value. This kind of creates the skin tone, and I'm basically going over all of this. And since I have a light value, I know where my lightest value is going to be. I'm going to kind of let that stay for now, and everything else is getting the value. Just a base tone, skin tone. Whether you're drawing a dark skinned person or a light skinned person, it's good to have a skin tone. And I'm going to give the light highlight area just a little bit. Alright, I'm taking my blending stump and I'm using the side. And I'm just going to kind of blend this out. You notice I'm using circular motion. I want the skin to be nice and even. So there's a nice skin tone. Alright, now when we actually get into the shadow, a lot of times people draw these lines that come straight down, but there are no lines here. Now there is a dark shadow that we saw that came from the eye. When we drew the eye video, the eyebrow was here, and we had this dark shadow that kind of came from the eye. That shadow kind of leads down to create the sides of the nose. It's not a line, it's a value. We want to be careful to keep that value as a value. So instead of drawing a line, I'm coming down with the value. And even as I'm adding this in, I'm kind of using a circular motion. Again, I'm trying my best to keep a nice smooth value. I don't want to create directional lines as much if possible. And that value kind of comes down, and it actually comes inside the nostril a little bit. There's a shadow here. When we look at the three nostrils, or the two nostrils, you have a nostril area here that basically creates a circle. You have this one that creates a small circle. Then of course the middle part of the nose, it creates a larger circle. And that larger circle, and when those circles meet, that's where that shadow kind of comes in between here and creates that visual kind of a shadow that you will see forming. Now the outside line that we already have here, we can let that shadow kind of go right into that little area, and that would be probably a sharper edge, but I'm going to blend it out into the cheek. So not a line, but we blend this one line out into the cheek. And back up into the nose. Same thing on the other side. Bring that shadow from the eye, let it come down. Again, we have that circle here, we have the big circle here, so we know the shadow's going to kind of come around here. Separating the nostril from the big part in the middle of the nose. Keeping a circular motion again. We want to try to stay away from too much directions. The circular motion definitely keeps a nice even tone to the value. Remember, we don't want to create lines and directions in the face. Now, of course, you have several artists and drawers who draw very realistic portraits, and it's more expressive, so those direction of lines tend to follow the contour of the face, and so you know that those lines may have direction as expressive quality, which is definitely a nice aesthetic if that's what you're going for. Just remember that as long as your lights are in the right places, your shadows are in the right places, your drawing will be very realistic. On this side, since I put the shadow on the cheek here, on this side, when I put this line in for the nostril, I'm actually going to blend it inside of the nostril on this side. So I'm going on the inside and keep the sharp line kind of on the outside. Now there's an interesting thing. All the light parts of the face, the parts that come away from your face, those have the most light hits. So of course your nose kind of goes from here on the inside, and it kind of comes out, and then it kind of goes back in towards your lip. And so that area, this whole bottom area has a shadow, and so we want to make sure we have that shadow as we put this in here. So usually down here on the bottom we have a shadow. And you'll notice that I'm really just playing with my shadows right now. I haven't really touched the nostril, but I do see where the nostril is, and I am going around that area. So I guess that would make me, at this point, give those nostrils some attention. Now, the nostril, that line, the first line we drew, those two lines that we drew, will be a very sharp line, and is also the darkest area of the nose. So I'm gonna make that a nice sharp line. I'm gonna let it kind of fade off, and then as I come away from there, and again, this is based on the angle of the nose you're drawing, or the or how much of the inside of the nostrils you can see. I'm gonna blend down kind of creating the inside of the nose. Now this could be more or less of an area depending on the angle in which you are seeing your picture, or the person you're drawing, or the reference, or just a personal preference if you're just making it up as you go. But it does kind of fade off, and it is very dark near that edge, so it's a very sharp line. Let's put it on the other side. Again, letting it fade off at the bottom. And then this middle section, as it goes back in space, once it kind of hits the, as it goes back further, there will be kind of a shadow in there, kind of creates what looks like depth. So as that shadow kind of comes from here and it raises out to the point here where the light source hits, it does kind of transition to a lighter value. So I'm going to put a little bit of shadow down here and let it kind of fade up. With every dark shadow or dark area, a little bit of light always kind of helps out. So right above this area of the nostril, if we want to lighten this up just a bit, it kind of makes it really pop forward. So it makes the nostril part kind of pop forward. So I'm just going to erase just a little bit, just to make that pop forward a little bit. So it's creating that slight contrast, which helps bring it forward. And we can kind of shadow it back in if we erase too much and it's too light. But it definitely creates a transition or contrast that pushes and pulls and makes the drawing look more three-dimensional. Alright, I'm gonna come back with my blending stump and make all this smooth. And I don't know what I did with my blending stump. Well, let's just keep rolling. So the shadow that comes down the middle, you want to kind of push the darkness just a bit, because once that nose goes from forward and kind of comes in and hits the cheek, there is kind of a darkness that kind of comes down, almost like creating a different plane. You have the front here and you have the side of your nose. Even though it curves and it's subtle, there still is a side, and we want to kind of create that by creating a slightly darker value to going down the middle of the shadow on the side of the nose. Again, no lines, just playing with our value transitions. And again, you can always use a photo reference, or if you're drawing from life, or if you're drawing from a mirror, really pay attention to how those shadows are created when you're making these shadows. Of course, in the brow, right up here between the eyes, the nose gets the deepest part before the forehead comes out. So there's definitely a shadow that kind of comes in here, and you want to kind of put that shadow in. Subtle, could be darker depending on the person. And of course, this light area is just not a light area. You want to make sure you blend it out and create a nice transition from your shadow to your light area. Trying to have your lightest area without the darks. Alright, now we're going to kind of move down to the bottom of these nostrils. So how does this little area in here kind of work? We kind of have this looking pretty good. So what happens is this nostril, as it comes around, the shadow kind of comes under. And because this comes under, there is a darkness in here, but then it kind of fades out because as the light hits here, it cuts off the shadow, which is why this is dark. But then there may be a little light that hits in here. So we want to kind of create that shadow and that effect. But then we also want to lead down into this little dimple. So there's like the space between your nose and your lip, and you have what's called the philtrum. It's that little dimple right in the middle of your lip, your top lip. It's why your top lip kind of has that curve on it. And so we want to lead that shadow down into that philtrum from here, so it doesn't just end, but it kind of leads to that philtrum. And so the philtrum is kind of just like, almost like parentheses, but a subtle valued out parentheses. And so the lip kind of comes up and it comes to a little point, then it goes in, it comes up to a point. So you kind of have these two light areas before the shadow kind of takes over. So we're going to kind of create that effect using our shadows. And so the nostril kind of runs right into that value. It helps create that illusion. Remember, whenever you're drawing, you're basically creating an illusion of depth. So how we use value is making things look further away and closer up. It can make it look curved, it can make it look flat. And that's our goal when creating and using value, is how do we make that illusion of depth. The more accurate your illusion is, the more realistic your drawing looks. Or should I say believable, not necessarily realistic. You can have a really good drawing that's not intentionally looking realistic, but it looks believable as depth and space. And again, on this side, we want to bring that value down. And again, see, I have the shadow kind of going in the cheek here. I'm going to switch it to the inside of the nostril and let that value kind of come up, since we're underneath the nose. Again, very softly, but very subtly, I'm using a little bit of circular motion. I have a little bit of cross hatching in this area, but again, I really want to keep those values looking nice and smooth. Come back up here and bring a little bit of darkness down the middle to create that side of the nose. Then I'm gonna come in with my blending stump. Okay, let's start blending some of this out. And you can do this earlier off. I really want to work my pencil, so I waited. I was looking for it earlier, I couldn't find it. Now I have it. As I'm adding this value in, I want to be nice and smooth with it. I don't want to press super hard, and I don't want to blend all my hard work out. So I'm very much being concerned with where my shadows are actually going to be, where do I want to be soft and not soft. So I'm very softly kind of blending this out and create a nice smoother transition. You can very much not use the blending stump at all. I know there are some people who prefer not to use it, some people who prefer to use it. The blending stump is definitely a tool to really create a smoother blended transition, especially in your really light areas. As I'm transitioning from gray to white and I want to create those subtle value changes, I can do that more so with the blending stump because I'm not adding more and more pencil, but I'm just manipulating the surface quality of what I already have. Again, I'm using a circular motion, and it's all about values and where the lights and shadows go. You'll notice that I'm not just going across the whole thing, that I am going around the contour of the nose and the face. So from here I have a shadow, I want to stay in this shadow area and just blend that out, making sure I still keep my edge nice and clean, so I don't want to go past that edge, but also blending it out into the cheek area, into the skin tone. As I work my way around to the space between the nose and the mouth, again I'm staying around the nostril to keep that separated. If I go inside the nostril, then I want to exclusively work inside the nostril, creating those shadows. The great thing I do like about using a blending stump versus like my finger is there's no oils from this blending stump, it's just paper. So if I want to come back with my eraser, which I will, and pull out some lights, it's a lot easier and more effective to draw with my eraser when I use them with blending stump, because everything is right on the surface and there's no oil mixing from my finger. It's not too hard and pressed down into the paper, so I can easily come in and erase this out and use my eraser as a drawing tool for my light values. And you'll notice that this leads you right into the lip area. And of course the lip will start there, and that will be the little dip. And this would kind of take you down into the corner of the lips, corner of the mouth. Alright, let's come back with my eraser. Let's pull out some highlights, and that'll be pretty much the end. So now I'm just kind of looking for the highlight areas. If there are some areas that the light seems to hit pretty strongly, some edges that need to be sharpened up, this is where you can kind of do that using your eraser. If there are some areas that need to be darkened up or sharpened up, you can come in and make those sharp areas, add to your shadows. If you have somebody with freckles or moles, those things will be added in at this moment. You don't want to add them in before you start adding your value. They just kind of fade away. So just those subtle little additions can add to the realistic nature of your drawing. Just know that when you're adding in these darknesses, always make sure you blend them back out. Say this person may have like a little mole here. I can come in and just add that little mole. Any little imperfections, freckles, all that will be added in here. Just adds to a little realism. I can do the softer, you know, sometimes people with freckles have lighter freckles and darker freckles. So the blending stump can be a good tool to add in some of those details as well, if you want to add those in there, so they can be kind of soft, not so obvious. And you pretty much have a human nose.